This is Dan Dicks here reporting for Press for Truth, and last week, left-wing student activists took over a campus at Columbia University with copycat protests springing up everywhere nationwide. So-called Gaza camps and tent cities have been set up at campuses like Harvard and Yale and Berkeley, to name a few. But is any of this really organic and decentralized? Or is there a lot more here going on behind the scenes? I mean, just look at the response that some of these students give when they're asked about what they're protesting about. They don't have a damn clue.
What would you say is the main goal with tonight's protest?
I think the goal is just showing our support for Palestine and demanding that NYU stops. I honestly don't know all of what NYU's doing.
Is there something that NYU's doing?
I really don't know. I'm pretty sure they're... Do you know what NYU's doing?
About what?
About Israel. Why are we protesting here?
Palestine will be free!
I wish I was more educated.
I'm not either.
The masked woman there says, "I'm not educated." And the girl responds with, "I'm not either." So what the hell are you doing there then? With identical tents being set up at every one of these sites for these clueless kids and food being shipped in, it is abundantly clear that someone is orchestrating and funding all of this. And at the tip of the spear, you'll find it's none other than billionaire George Soros and his son Alexander. And of course, they're being very stealthy about it. George Soros has been giving billions of dollars to his Open Society foundations, which his son now controls. The Open Society will then give massive amounts of money to the Tides Foundation. The Tides Foundation will then send that cash out to smaller groups who are encouraging these protests. As the money trickles down, you'll eventually find Soros-funded branches of the Students for Justice in Palestine and the Soros-funded group called the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. So who are they? USCPR is a political home for all who believe that freedom for the Palestinian people is an integral part of achieving our collective liberation. We provide resources and strategic support to the U.S.-based Palestine Solidarity Movement, channeling grassroots power into positive change in U.S. policy and public opinion. We work with local organizers and activists, policymakers, movement leaders, media, and advocacy organizations to advance a rights-based, accountability, and justice-oriented framework from the U.S. to Palestine. And it turns out that at least 3 of these college protests, paid protesters, who are referred to as fellows, are the ones who are leading the charge. These people in particular are paid protesters who are making money to agitate and fuel the explosion of radical anti-Israel protests at colleges all across the country. The group has received at least $300,000 from Soros' Open Society foundations since 2017. And they also took in $355,000 from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund since 2019. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund claims to be advancing social change for a more just, sustainable, and peaceful world. So absolutely nothing about this protest movement is organic. It's all about seeding division in a divide and conquer tactic. Order out of chaos is their modus operandi. And just because this is localized to the US right now, doesn't mean that Canada is not out of the crosshairs as well. So I want to leave you today with a short documentary that I made over 8 years ago now, which explains who George Soros is and what his agenda is for society, because we're starting to see it unfold now in a very major way. And guys, if you appreciate my efforts to bring you this information, like the film that you are about to see right now, please check that top link in the description below to where you can find me at pressfortruth.ca/donate. So thanks for watching, guys. Please enjoy this short film I made titled George Soros and the Canadian Agenda Exposed. George Soros, the divide and conquer king, currently has his eyes set on Canada. But just who is this man, and what does he have in store for the Canadian people? What is it that built his character? Who or what made George Soros the man he is today? To find these answers, we need to look no further than the Holocaust. During Germany's dark days, the 14-year-old Hungarian Jew posed as a Christian. With his adopted godfather, George Soros helped to confiscate the property of his former neighbors and friends. He watched them get rounded up and sent off to death camps. This kind of experience would scar most people, knowing that he was secretly a Jew, watching the people he knew stripped off of all their belongings and sent off to die like animals to the slaughter. But Soros says that this is what made him. This horrifying experience helped shape him as a person, for which he says he feels no guilt.
When the Nazis occupied Budapest in 1944, George Soros' father was a successful lawyer. He lived on an island in the Danube and liked to commute to work in a rowboat. But knowing there were problems ahead for the Jews, he decided to split his family up. He bought them forged papers, and he bribed a government official to take 14-year-old George Soros in and swear that he was his Christian godson. But survival carried a heavy price tag. While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews. These are pictures from 1944 of what happened to George Soros' friends and neighbors. You're a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust by posing as a Christian.
Right.
And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps.
Right. I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made.
In what way?
That one should think ahead, one should understand and anticipate events, and one is threatened. It was a tremendous threat of evil. I mean, it was a very personal experience of evil.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt.
No.
What kind of monster is this? A man who can crash currencies just by making the wrong or right statements. A man whose actions in the market are followed by speculators all around the world.
I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do.
Like risking $2 billion in Russia. When the Russian market began falling apart in August, Soros was the country's single largest investor. He called the U.S. Treasury and asked Uncle Sam for $7 billion to prop up the ruble. When U.S. officials failed to intervene, Soros wrote a letter to the Financial Times of London saying he thought the Russian currency should be devalued by as much as 25%. A few words from Soros were enough to cause panic selling that fueled the crash. What's it like to have a statement that you make have such serious, grievous consequences? I mean, you can, it looks to me like in a number of situations you can take a position against a currency or make a statement, and the whole country falls apart.
Well, it's a tremendous sense of responsibility, actually. And it's also a humbling experience because I am actually trying to do the right thing, and sometimes what I do has an unintended negative consequence, as it did in Russia.
When he visits other countries, he's treated as a head of state. And it's little surprise. A man with this much power practically is a head of state. He is above and beyond the state. He funnels his wealth into influencing politics and culture. He's the divide and conquer king. He has inflamed race issues by funding Black Lives Matter. He's the man behind Occupy Wall Street's ad busters and the so-called anarchists of the left. He thrives on establishing order out of chaos, and therefore, he funds the chaos. And of course, Canada is not immune. Already, the decision to allow in countless refugees is controversial. As we've witnessed in Europe, many of these refugees are destabilizing once peaceful communities. They are refusing to accept Western traditions and cultural practices and demanding that Western governments subsidize them and respect their barbarous culture and religion. Of course, the issue of why they are refugees to begin with is never answered. If the American military establishment hadn't decimated the Middle East, Europe would not be having this problem. And neither would Canada. While Immigration Minister John McCallum says that Canada needs to substantially increase immigration in order to fill Canada's labor needs. A bogus argument that does not pass scrutiny. The refugee question is a done deal. Canada has teamed up with George Soros and the UN Refugee Agency to promote and help settle refugees in Canada and around the world. As John McCallum said in an interview, we are having a joint initiative, and tomorrow we will announce it between Canada, George Soros, and the UNHCR, which is an initiative to sell our privately sponsored refugee program to other countries. I know of at least 13 countries who have a potential interest. He also said, I'm grateful to the UN and to George Soros for co-sponsoring this initiative with us. The fact that he is a billionaire gives you a clue as to what he might do, which is to contribute funding. And I know George Soros has really interested in the whole refugee crisis, and so it is normal for him to partner with us on this initiative, and since, as you have just said, he's a billionaire, I think that he will also provide some of the money. It is obvious that George Soros wants conflict in Canada akin to the American race war. After a manufactured picture of a Syrian child washed up on the beach made headlines around the world last year, Canadians have accepted the liberal promise to bring in refugees without question. Standing against this is outside the realm of allowable opinion. It's considered as uncivil as refusing to wear a poppy or publicly supporting Donald Trump. In the cold, socialist netherworld known as Canada, you cannot oppose the UN or unvetted refugees without being labeled a racist right-wing ideologue. But this is precisely the kind of conflict that George Soros thrives off of. As the chairman of the Open Society Foundation, the radical leftist is hell-bent on undermining the Western traditions that made Canada and the United States free and prosperous. George Soros is dedicated to reshaping the world in his image. He is a shining example of corporate money not only influencing politicians, but the media and culture as well. George Soros is everything that is wrong with this system. If Canada is going to survive this century, then men like him need to be stopped. But don't think that old age will stop the Soros agenda. His son Alex Soros is right behind him, participating in the far-left anti-Trump protests. Born in 1985 and not having experienced wars like his father has, it will soon be young Alex Soros' turn as the torch is passed on to the next generation of power-hungry psychopaths to have his legacy in the establishment of a new world order established by utilizing his father's technique of achieving order out of chaos. But for every step they take towards this agenda, we will be 2 steps ahead, exposing their corruption and plans for global domination. You can help us defeat this beast by donating to our cause or by joining us as a PFT member or a PFT patron.